Good evening. I'd like to call to order the August 28th meeting, 2019 meeting of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission and begin by introducing a new commissioner, Connie Kimmel, who is joining us to fill out our slots. And you are representing the county, correct? Or the area,
Area of impact.
Right, yep. Area of impact, excuse me. So, welcome.
Thank you.
And okay, so beginning with item 1, approval of the minutes from July 24th. Are there any additions, corrections, deletions?
Looks fine. Move to approve.
Thank you, Victoria. Mike, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Item 2 is public comment. It's time we set aside for the public to speak before the commission about matters that aren't on our agenda tonight or pending before us. Is anyone... We have one person in the audience. Are you here to speak to us? No? Okay. That's a reminder to anybody who might be listening that it's an opportunity to come and talk to us. Okay, item 3, approval of reasoned statement of relevant criteria and standards for the recreational vehicle park. And Mike, do you have anything you want to say about it, or?
Yeah, this is just our standard RCS document that's attached to your packet. It was for the expansion of the RV park at 1651 Carmichael that we heard last time and recommended approval to the county with a condition.
I have a question. My paper says before the Board of Adjustment,
Yeah.
and its Board of Adjustment is mentioned in here several times.
Yeah, I had that same question. Did it go to the Board of Adjustments?
No, I think it's
No,
an
that's
error.
that was an error in our template.
And it's
so
the
I
wrong
can-
date, too, by the way. Because I checked and I thought, well, maybe it did go before the Board of Adjustments, because July 24th was not one of our meeting dates. I don't think, right? So, I had the same question, Victoria, so good catch, yeah.
So it's twice on page 1, again on
Yeah.
page 3, again on page 4.
7/24 is the correct date.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm referring to the Board of Adjustment being on here.
Oh,
Not the
yeah,
date.
planning and zoning heard it, and it was before the board, yeah, it was the July 24th was the correct date. But
Oh.
yeah, it should be planning and zoning instead of Board of Adjustment, so I can get that corrected.
Right, okay, yeah.
You want to bring that back to us after correcting it, or do you, are we very trusting people?
I think it's fine.
There's just a few places where it's
Yeah.
Board of Adjustment, so.
I can go along with that.
All right, so does somebody want to make a motion to accept these with the change? Or are there other corrections?
Not any conditions, right? I move to accept it with the change noted. Call it good.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Rob. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. So, now we have a public hearing on the legislative amendment regarding accessory dwelling unit standards. And Mike will give a presentation first.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Before you tonight, we have a public hearing for an amendment to the ADU ordinance that we've been working on for the last couple months. So just a little bit of background, the ADU ordinance was first approved by City Council on April 6, 2015. It's currently allowed in all residential zones, albeit they must meet a minimum lot size in the zone to be eligible for an ADU. And then we had various development standards. The requirement that they be at least, or be a maximum of 600 square feet or 40% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, whichever is less. Be restricted to 2 occupants, and that they have owner occupancy on the property, whether or not they're in the ADU or the main house. And then an additional off-street parking space was required for an ADU as well. And 8 ADUs have been permitted since the adoption of the ADU ordinance. And we have received numerous inquiries, and this is really what spurred this amendment over the years as to people wanting ADUs, but they didn't have the appropriate lot size for the lot that they had to develop the ADU on, so they weren't allowed to do that. And most of these were located in more traditional neighborhoods close to the city core, where higher density is already allowed, so typically like a multifamily zone or a medium-density residential zone. And we also had a goal of the comprehensive plan to promote a variety of housing types while preserving neighborhood character, and ADUs do that because they're usually located in the backyard or away from the house or in the main dwelling and don't really change the character of the principal structure. So we had taken a look at all the non-conforming lot sizes within the area. So we just queried the entire city, and all the non-conforming lots are highlighted in red, representing those lots. And then east of Mountain View, you don't see very many in this area because it's relatively new development. They're primarily situated, you have an R4 zone, so these are overlaid on the zoning map. This color here is R4. Close to the core of the city. And then you also have R3, which is medium density residential in the blue. That allows duplexes, town homes, and twin homes. And then you end up transitioning to single family residential. And so this is the same lot size whether you're east of Mountain View or in the Fort Russell neighborhood. And so that just results in a number of lots that are, don't meet that minimum 7,000 square foot minimum lot size because they were developed at a time where the lot size was much smaller, or maybe they didn't have a lot size requirement and they predated the zoning code. And so those are primarily the areas where we're seeing all the nonconformities. And then I just thought I'd zoom in a little closer to kind of this pocket with East City Park here. You can see these are the lots. Really if you went up and down the street, you wouldn't be able to tell that these lots didn't meet the minimum lot size. They're intermingled amongst other lots within that area, and really it just becomes more of an equity issue with, all the lots that meet the minimum lot size, but their neighbor, which may be 500 square feet smaller than their lot, isn't eligible for an ADU. And these are areas where we're generally trying to promote ADUs and infill development. A lot of them have alley access with garages at the rear of the properties, which are conducive to allowing ADUs. And so that's just an example of what it looks like on the ground. And then we reviewed the previous survey results. So early in, I think it was 2012, we ended up putting out a survey question in the citizen survey asking about support for ADUs in neighborhoods. And it was pretty overwhelming as far as supporting it. So 25% strongly agree, 38% agree, would likely add ADU to their property. So this was a little more mixed, quite a bit disagreed or were neutral. And so that's really what we've seen over the years since they've been approved, is that people really don't have an issue with their neighbor having one, but everybody's not running out to develop one at this moment. And then we broke it down by citizen survey sectors, strongly agree or agree to the questions of supporting ADUs in their neighborhood. Quite a bit of support citywide, a little less than kind of the university, than the southern district there, the University Heights area and Indian Hills. And then we asked the question about, strongly disagree or disagree to the question of supporting ADUs, and it was substantially low. And so in these areas, you're looking at 11% to 16% that don't really have an issue with ADUs in the neighborhood.
So, Michael, most of those lots are probably between maybe 5,500 and it isn't a significant difference, but we had 7,000 before, right? Is that what the?
7,000 is our current lot size requirement. A lot of these, like the area that I just had shown you, are around 6,250.
Yeah,
so they're
right.
almost 7,000. They're 750 square
right.
feet short. So.
Yeah.
And then we had gone through this before. This was just the common elements to ADUs, and from these results, we ended up developing what the ADU standards were for owner occupancy, off-street parking, maximum occupants, and maximum size. So this would be the proposal, would just be to eliminate the minimum lot size requirement. So we'd be keeping majority of the section here, all the standards, and would just be eliminating the requirement that lots meet the minimum lot size in order to be eligible for an ADU. And so staff's recommendation is to conduct a public hearing and upon proposed ordinance and recommend approval of the ordinance to City Council as presented. I'd certainly be able to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mike. Does anyone have any questions for Mike?
What, did you consider just changing it to 5,000? What a bit, would that have done the same, had the same effect?
Well, that would have a lot more broader implications about, in different areas of the city. All the areas east of Mountain View are relatively new, and they were all developed with a 7,000 square foot limitation. And so a lot of it's trying to preserve that neighborhood character. You could look at maybe creating another zoning district just to take care of these properties that are more, located in the core of town. But this was a lot easier just to eliminate the minimum lot size requirement, so. And it really covers different zones. So you have areas where it's R3, you have areas where it's R4, areas where it's residential office. And so it's really just not one zone where it's an issue. It spans multiple zones as far as lots that don't meet the minimum lot size.
Other questions, anybody? Okay, thank you, Mike. So I will open the public hearing, and would anyone would you like to come in? There's no one in the audience who wants to come up and speak in favor or opposed to this legislative amendment. So as a result, I will close the public hearing. And that was an easy one. No lines around the block. Anyway, so commissioners, do you have any comments, questions, further? Does anyone want to?
I would recommend approval of the ordinance as presented.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Rob. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Thank you. So my understanding is because it's a legislative amendment, we don't have relevant criteria and standards, correct? And
No.
That's it?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to item 5, citizen survey questions. Mike's going to present several. I know several of us have submitted some potential questions, and we also have the question from 2004 that we could look at recycling. And this is all due before we meet again, is that correct?
We have one more meeting.
One more meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so like we discussed last time, it's our time of the year for citizen survey questions. We'd gone through a little bit of background about the citizen survey, how it started in 2002, really as a benchmark for community perceptions and evaluate municipal services. We typically send it out to 1,200 residential addresses in the city, and that's statistically valid at that point. And the commission questions really started with 4 and is now limited to 2. And then in 2016, Citizen Survey was restructured to an annual survey. And so there's alternating years. Every other year, the commissions ask commission questions. And then you typically have the city questions on the, I believe it's even years.
Even years? Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
So these are examples of, questions that we had asked before. I think last time it was in relation to tiny homes, when that was more of a hot button topic. And then we went through all the previous years. I think this was primarily one question that we thought last time that it might be interesting to ask again. And we just, I think, left it as to think up your own questions. and then maybe to think about this question if we were to ask it again, and some changes that you may make in some of the different categories there. And so it's primarily just identify the importance of the following neighborhood characteristics to you. And we were thinking at the time that it's been 15 years since this question was asked, and whether or not those perceptions could have changed in that 15-year time frame. Is just what neighborhood characteristics are important: proximity to school, work, shopping, downtown, parks and rec facilities, single-family neighborhoods, duplex, apartment neighborhoods, and large to small lot sizes, historic districts, having alley access, cul-de-sacs or dead-end streets, small street blocks with numerous street intersections. And so those were the results. Just looking at, ones that I was possibly thinking of, if we're still going to use that question, it's probably good to continue to ask the proximity to school, work, and shopping, and parks and rec facilities. We've kind of asked iteration of the question of mixture of housing types, how important that is to people. And really, just over the years when we've asked those types of questions, we've really just got a mixed bag. I mean, there's people that want to live where they have to drive everywhere and they want the larger lot, and you have other people that love living closer to downtown and are able to walk everywhere. And it seems to be split fairly even as far as just the preferences of people and how they live. And so that's really, I don't expect to see much difference when if we were to ask this question again in that category. But there may be an opportunity. We've been working on the subdivision ordinance. We've been working on the traditional and cluster subdivision option, and it, may be able to get a little more feedback on that. We preference on smaller lot sizes with more neighborhood open space, or traditional neighborhoods with narrower streets, alley access, and smaller lot sizes. And then we always seem to ask the question of commercial services in your neighborhood and whether or not that's a good thing, and it always seems to come back as not so good. And maybe if you rephrased it, so maybe a restaurant at the edge of your neighborhood that you can walk or bike to, and I think people always envision that there's going to be a restaurant right next to them that's going to be open till midnight every night. In reality, these are typically placed on arterials and a lot more arterials and collector streets that carry a lot more traffic.
I was
So-
wondering with that particular idea if it would make sense to say within a 10-minute walk, or within a,
Sure.
10-minute bike ride or something like that. I don't know. So that people realize it's not right in their face. It's something that serves their neighborhood.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, just looking at, some of these I thought weren't really going to provide us a whole lot of information to, not a whole lot of information to be able to do anything with. And so maybe just weeding some of those out and going towards trying to integrate some of the projects that we're currently working on.
I would say proximity to campus also,
Yeah, could be.
if you're going to
Yeah.
have that type of a
Sure.
list.
So that was, I just taken our feedback from last time and revised it a little bit, and we can either choose to go that direction or choose not to. I'd ask you to kind of think about it yourselves and then submit your own questions. And I think Wendy and Victoria had sent me some questions, and we can just go over what they had come up with here. I put them up on the screen. So this is, I believe, are Wendy's. Which of the following? These are more geared towards, I think, the council's recent action on climate change. The following strategies should the Planning and Zoning Commission prioritize or consider to help the Moscow City government meet its goals to mitigate the effects of climate change. Unshaded pavement contributes to what is termed the urban heat island effect as more densely inhabited parts of the city. Which of the following strategies would you support to help reduce the urban heat island effect in Moscow? More shade trees in parking lots over 25 cars. Require shade trees along street corridors and sidewalks in new subdivisions. Provide homeowners with incentives to plant trees along sidewalks and street corridors. And then the next one, which of the following strategies should be used to help reduce Moscow's carbon footprint? Require electric car and e-bike charging stations for new subdivisions, apartment complexes over 10 units, and commercial projects with parking requirements in excess of 25 cars. Develop remote parking areas for long-term storage and occasional car use in concert with the U of I, or extend operational hours for transit. And then I believe these were, I think it's
That's
still
all,
Wendy's.
yeah, it was kind of a
Yeah.
lot of options, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure
I
which
guess,
ones we would
yeah.
want to include. Yes.
I mean, I like all the questions, but aren't these more appropriately coming from Sustainable Environment Commission?
Well, I
As a-
think they come from multiple commissions, because if it's a
Multiple
city
commissions.
goal, and in our case, these are more geared towards land use decisions and-
Right,
and planning.
Is there a way that we can word the question so that it's really apparent that it's a land use issue, as opposed to just a broader, environmental question? For example, could you go back one, Mike? So, require electric car and bike charging stations for new subdivisions. Would that be something that we would?
Might be in the subdivision ordinance that you have to provide an electric car charging station. Because the plug-in only is what they go, like, they don't go very far.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for example, and so if you were trying to encourage people to use those,
Yeah.
not everybody can have one in their backyard. I don't know, it was
Yeah,
just, yeah.
I don't object to the questions,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
really not my point. I mean, I think they're really valid questions, I just want to make sure that we can
Right.
associate them with the work that we do as a
Right.
commission, as opposed to a
Right.
broader environmental issue that might be brought up by.
No, I totally agree with you, and I guess I thought I made an attempt to do that, but maybe not enough, but.
So I see the tree one as being tree commission, and this is typical because everybody's out here working on their questions, and there's overlap.
Yeah,
And so we really don't know what somebody else is going to come up with, but I see transportation and I see trees, tree commission, and I would stay away from those. But there are some questions here that would be more along ours.
And then promote sustainable neighborhood development that is walkable, higher density, and located within 10-minute walk or bike radius from commercial services.
And that would sort of feed into what we just talked about.
Provide local property tax incentives for construction of carbon-neutral buildings. Purchase hybrid models for new city vehicles.
And
And then these were the ones that Victoria had submitted. There's a growing interest in finding ways to encourage the development of affordable housing within city limits. Would you or others seek out new housing developments if they were more affordable than your current living situation?
so why wouldn't that be fair and affordable housing, Victoria? I mean, we're all related. It's not,
We
you
are
can't really
related.
segregate all these, I mean, I think it's great, but I would throw the same thing back to you in terms of
Okay, that would-
that issue, yeah.
Sure. Townhomes, twin homes, and condominiums are three types of privately owned homes that can offer more affordability. Would you favor more of them being built? Reducing lot sizes reduces the cost of single-family home, but also increases the number of homes built in the area. Is that a good trade-off? And then she had other areas of interest. Most new housing developments have been for apartments. Would you prefer other housing development types instead? More housing generates more parking needs. Do you think if new developments and infill projects provided more on-site parking for their use, it would create new issues for the surrounding areas, such as concrete deserts from more lots? There is a growing trend towards more mixed-use development where convenience stores, in-home shops, professional offices, eateries, etc. blend into the neighborhood. Does this add ease and benefits to residential living? Moscow is a pedestrian and bike-friendly town. Would you like more accommodations for them in land development?
So as you speak, I'd say strike the last one, strike the first one, because I see that in other commissions now.
Well, yeah, I guess I don't see us as a bunch of discrete commissions. I see our missions overlapping. And so I don't know if it's
The
necessary.
challenge is to not wind up with pretty close to the same questions as another commission, because for a citizen answering the questions, they don't want to answer the same question twice.
Of course, we get related to the tree issue by providing a planting strip if the design of streets allows it. When we went through a period of time in the 60s and 70s when there was sidewalks, if they were there, were on the right on the curb, it made a different attitude, and so finding the right design is kind of where we hit the tree thing.
Right, because we with our subdivision ordinances, we also include street sections, and that's where it kind of falls in, I think. So I don't know, they're all good topics. One is kind of general neighborhood, one is more to do with housing preferences, and the third is to do with the city council goal of addressing climate change, could you explain what city council really has done with it, Brandy? Because you told me not much yet.
Yeah, well.
So, and that's why I thought it might be good, but.
Sure, yeah, we had a workshop just initially, the main workshop isn't happening until September, so that's when we really get into this. It was more of a review that coming up, we will be doing an update to the strategic plan, and part of what is in that are the major challenge areas that are identified. And under those major challenge areas, that's what helps to sort of guide decisions that are being made as far as budgeting and projects, that the goal is that they're addressing those major challenge areas. And climate change is not in the current strategic plan, so there was some discussion of maybe that should be added when we do this update of our strategic plan. So that is something that is yet to be determined, but there's some interest in identifying that as a new major challenge area, which could then help to guide many things, as I think that's what you're getting towards, anticipating that, and what role might planning and zoning have in the decisions that are made there, or any changes in addressing that major challenge area. It has not yet been worked through, and the strategic plan hasn't been updated, but that will be coming soon. We're having a workshop in September, is the last I heard. I don't know the date yet, so.
Well, thanks, yeah. So, it seems like we have 3 topic areas, and I don't know what people's preferences are, but yes.
Well, could we maybe split this into kind of 2 broader sections? The one going back to the 2004, where we're talking about neighborhood characteristics, maybe would inform one of the questions, and then the other one we could make more specifically toward climate related, so that we'd have 2 kind of broader views. I'd like to see us broaden it out beyond just the environmental or the climate issues, so that we can, I guess I'm kind of hung up on this, wanting to make sure that it's within our manageable interests of what we're asking, what people think that we should be doing as a commission. I don't mean it to sound like I don't support these questions, and I think it's a really important piece of it. I just want to make sure that we formulate it right. But I also like this one about neighborhood characteristics, which came from before, and I guess we would be kind of revisiting that. The one that you had in the earlier slide, I think it was the very first one that we were, proximities to, but down to the more manageable level that you had on the screen,
So do you think that we would get different responses than we got in 2004? Given the way the community's developed in the last, that's my problem with it.
I don't have a good answer for that.
But, that's my concern about it.
Yeah.
But maybe that says, so then what does that tell us? If it is the same. If it's not the same, then it does tell us something, and maybe it's worth taking the risk. But that was my concern about it. That's why I thought, well, I started to work on it, and then I thought, well, I'm not sure that we're going to find out anything new. I don't know, how did you sort of find the same
Yeah,
thing?
most of it is, if you got a car, it doesn't matter, because you get where you want to go in 10, 15 minutes. And if you're in a bike, you can do the same thing, and if you're walking, unless you're slow like me, it takes me 20, you know. So I just don't find it that relevant, and it's been asked and asked and asked in numbers of ways. So I would rather see a fresh question.
Wendy?
Yes. Oh, sorry. I
No,
didn't
that's
see-
okay. One thing I was thinking about in just hearing the proximity to things, I wonder, proximity to school or work or shopping. I would assume that most people that live in proximity to school live there because that's important to them. And the people that don't live in a close proximity to school, part of that is because it's not important to them. So I'm just not sure how much that's just reflecting the numbers of homes that are in close proximity to school. Those people maybe, it's just a reflection of that's why they chose their home in that neighborhood. So I just wonder with those, it's what planning and zoning concludes from those responses as far as making decisions moving forward of anything that might change. I don't know, just
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what we would conclude because, yeah, yeah.
Well, when you buy a house, location, location, location,
my.
So
Well,
if
yeah.
you need to be near a school, you'll be near a school. If you need to be near campus, you're looking to be near campus. I don't know what the other
But so
jobs
much
are.
of it depends on how you get there. And so,
Well,
and
and-
that
and
would
I'm-
need to be a related question.
I think in terms of planning and zoning and in terms of climate change, what you're looking at is the infrastructure, keeping it, you're talking infill, you're talking keeping things tight in so that you're not creating carbon footprint by having the roads all strung out. And that, to me, is planning and zoning's role, is using the infill and pretty much using infill, but keeping the infrastructure close to town. So it needs to be, if you're going to go for it. To me, that's really the only reason to talk about climate change and planning and zoning. I'm not sure there's another reason for climate change at planning and zoning level.
Wendy?
Yes.
I certainly understand, particularly the first four questions, and maybe we really wouldn't learn anything from that, but those last four questions could be relevant to some of the things that we are looking at, the cluster developments and and it could also tie to our goals of having more density. So maybe just eliminate those top four proximity issues, because you're right, we're probably gonna not learn that much more from it, but we might get
Unless
some-
it's more specific
Yeah.
than that, like within a 10-minute walking radius or within a, well, yeah.
Yeah.
But, I agree with you that I think even with the smaller lot size, even saying clustered development, using the word there so that people start to think about it. Because we are considering that essentially as an alternative.
They won't know
so,
what a clustered
yeah,
development is unless you
right.
explain it all. And I really like these things to stay simple. If I'm taking one, I don't want to read a paragraph about what it's talking about in order to answer the question. Yeah. I'm always rewriting the surveys because I like them.
Yeah, no, they're hard to write. They're right. Well, it could be something like smaller lot sizes with
Well,
more
you're
tightly clustered housing in order to provide more neighborhood open space, or as a trait, or something like that.
Well, your last four, I agree, the last four are a lot more relevant.
Yeah.
And they hit both affordable housing issues and climate change. The last four do. And they do it in a planning and zoning structure, or framework, or context, whatever word you want to use. So you could do an umbrella thing like climate change, affordable housing, different types of subdivision are on the radar. I'm not phrasing this as a real question. I don't know how to phrase the real question in the air here. But you could do a kind of umbrella. You're hitting several topics, and then you have questions, and those questions relate to all three of those topics.
Okay, so would that be one question? Then, just the bold and then the bottom four, and then, what do you want for a second question, or is that enough?
Yeah, I think I would agree with you that the bottom four are more relevant for me. I think that the others, I don't know, they're a little too generic. And so we don't know exactly what proximity means. And as Randy says, people who don't care about being close to school or work live on Moscow Mountain, duh. You know, and they're real happy people. They drive their kid to every possible thing. And apparently that's not important to them. Some people choose to be. But I think the bottom four questions are a little bit tied to a concept rather than, they're not quite as general. So I think we could get a little more out of the bottom four.
The bottom four are related to topics we're going to be discussing over the next couple of years.
And shopping now basically means groceries. Hardly any of us are in proximity to Amazon, but that's unfortunately where many people shop.
Yes.
So can we formulate a question like this where we have the four subcategories as just one question?
Sure,
Okay.
yeah.
So it would essentially be like,
Like that one.
Probably similar to this.
yeah, except it would be short, yeah. I know, it would be the range of strongly agree to disagree, yeah.
Do we want to pull parking in here somehow?
There's something, smaller lot sizes to allow for more we need something that clarifies that a little bit to me, more than it does. Like smaller lot sizes to allow for more shared neighborhood open space or something like that, or shared, I don't know. I'm not sure people will, get the point otherwise.
Maybe in exchange for.
Yeah,
Something like
something like that, yeah.
Okay.
And instead of a restaurant at the edge of the neighborhood, community services that you can easily bike or walk to. Does it have to be a restaurant, or are we saying that, I mean, if it's community services instead of a gas station, well, I mean, people worried about the slurp and burp for years that, that sort of contaminated the idea of having mixed use when it was operating as a bar. So avoiding that problem, but maybe not being quite so specific as a restaurant, I don't know. Or do you think that's a good idea? Yeah.
I took the liberty of plagiarizing Victoria's, one of her questions. There's a growing trend towards more mixed-use development where convenience stores, in-home shop, professional, et cetera, blend into neighborhood. Does this add ease and benefits to residential living? Almost could tie in together with that question number 4. And granted, make it a little broader because it brings up more businesses. I know looking at it as a citizen of Moscow, it would ease some things in my neighborhood. But I don't want a Red Lobster built on the corner by my house either.
Right.
Well, the reason I just chose restaurant when I, was thinking about it was that I think in previous questions, restaurant's always the most acceptable commercial use
coffee
in an
shop,
area.
yeah.
And nobody wants a 7-Eleven. Like,
Right, right.
I mean, that's like everybody's biggest fear is
Yeah.
a
They
7-Eleven on the corner of their neighborhood.
They?
We used to
They
have
may
one on
not,
Sixth Street,
yeah.
wasn't it a 7-Eleven or it was a something like that? It was
Yeah, there was.
yeah, but now there's a dentist office
It's
or
a dentist's
yeah.
office, and then we turned to school.
yeah.
I think we had two at
Yeah.
one time, but they've both been nicely used
Yeah.
as other activities.
Yeah.
But it probably would be, if we could think of a more generic word
Mm-hmm.
and not use, there must be several kinds of neighborhood businesses that could be walked or biked to.
Or we could even say types of neighborhood businesses that are acceptable to walk or bike to, and then just list them and as a subcategory or something like that, and just see how specific, where people's real objections are,
Grocery store, coffee shop.
yeah.
Yeah, we had, so this is back in 2010, and we had something kind of similar to that.
Yeah, I got you,
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, then that becomes a question in itself. if you
Yeah,
go
it
that
does,
route.
that's true. Oh, it's hard. It's hard doing these surveys.
It is, it's very hard to answer.
One of the topics that we've heard a bit about over the past year is parking and parking requirements. Is it a topic that we ought to address, or is it,
Or is that Transportation Commission? Who gets parking?
But
We do.
every time
Do
we
we?
have a public hearing, you've
We all
got
do.
people in here talking about parking.
both, yeah.
Well, I
We-
mean, something
we-
about a shared parking, I mean, we
we-
have the downtown model and then, yeah, no, I don't
Yeah.
know.
I'm
I-
not quite sure how to address it, and maybe it's
Yeah.
not ripe to address yet.
Well, we have that survey, isn't the city doing a study of parking? Isn't there a contract for it professionally?
Yeah, I think it was included in the.
Yeah, there's
budget.
no contract yet, but it's budgeted for.
Included in the
Oh,
budget.
okay, yeah.
Um,
And is it going to be all over the city or just downtown, or what's the area of focus, or do you know yet?
I think the intent is the main area of focus would be the downtown, but also some of the surrounding areas that have been impacted. I know like some of the residential areas that have had some of the spillover complaints for some of the higher density things. But my understanding is in and right around the downtown core.
So what would we want to find out?
I'm not sure.
Would would a public bond pay for a parking garage? I don't know, probably not. At 30,000 a spot or whatever they cost.
I think where planning and zoning has been, the reason people have sometimes come to you is like with the, is it the PUDs? When you're making a decision about some variances.
Yeah,
And that kind of does come down to the decision that planning and zoning makes, right? As far as how much parking. And that doesn't help you with the question. I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. But, that's maybe where it is not really transportation, because that comes down to the zoning requirements and that are,
Was identity a PUD?
yes.
Okay, because there's a big one right there.
The parking issue is really essentially a downtown one though, isn't it?
Well,
In your mind?
It's also related to allowable density on a particular parcel.
Yeah, and Legacy Crossing.
Exactly.
I mean, we keep talking about how bad identity is. Right across the street, we have Legacy Crossing that allows exactly the same thing. So it's really not, we're already out there, so as far as, we're going to have, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a challenge, I should say, an opportunity and a
Or
challenge.
there's going to be a change in lifestyle that makes it less of a problem.
Exactly, but we don't know where, we're
don't
sort
know
of
which.
on that, in that gray area right now, where we don't know, people, it needs a cultural change. And, will that happen? I don't know, and so I think we've already sort of got in written form that we allow parking relief in a huge area of town that's right across the street from where we allowed it in a PUD, so I guess I'm a little afraid of the question. Because
It may not be the time to address it here.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's always a hot button issue
Right.
that will get people's attention.
Yeah, and I think if anybody out there answering this, and if they pay any attention at all to what's going on in planning and zoning, like I said, parking comes up almost every time anytime there's a hearing where there really are people here, they're here about parking, for the most part. And
More
I
traffic
think
through their,
it's-
it's more than parking.
Well, okay.
It's
the two,
traffic
the two.
through their neighborhood.
And so,
yeah.
I think it's remiss not to have something in here, just to get feedback. Not that we're gonna fix it necessarily, but you're just looking for feedback.
What type of feedback are you looking for? And how would it inform what you're trying to do? That would be my question. Giving people a chance to vent or really getting something constructive that we can use in our decision-making. And I don't know. I'm not sure how to do that.
You know what I would love to know is how many people out there that are struggling with parking situations because either adequate parking isn't on site or something else, would be willing to park in an off-site parking lot because they don't need their car very often. So that's, if people won't do that, it would be good to know that
I
before
had
we
that in
really
one
try
of my
to pursue
questions
that.
on climate change. Would you be willing to?
So, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe that could possibly be a way to gauge interest. How many of you out there would be willing to, I don't know, maybe for free, but have your car located on a off-site lot? I'm not sure.
Or change your mode of transportation.
Right.
I mean, I guess that's the ultimate goal is to, all of a sudden it becomes so hard because you're trying to find a parking spot every day and you can't, that your mode of transportation ends up shifting to walking or biking to wherever it is you're going. And, I mean, that's the ultimate hope that ends up happening in these areas, is that they just don't bring a car and they just end up walking or biking to wherever it is they want to go. In addition to maybe an off-site parking lot and, other facilities like that.
Maybe it could be a combined, if there were an off-site parking lot, would you be willing to leave your car there and bike and
Served
walk more
by
often or
transit,
something?
too. I mean, by a
Yeah, I mean,
transit,
all of that
yeah,
gets
yeah.
complex for sure, but I think just to even gauge, right now, that isn't an option. So the people that come with their cars and maybe aren't using them but still need to put them somewhere.
I think that's a good point. And in other countries, from what I'm hearing, mostly here, is they do that in other countries. They park them in other places.
Are you
And,
thinking,
I listened to the Board of Adjustment with the 1912, and I picked up on, outside of the 500 feet, there are other parking lots, and people don't mind if they're going to the 1912 going outside of the 500 feet, because it's the 1912 and whatever's there is really cool. So it suggests that if there's a strong enough motivation, people are willing to walk, and the 1912 apparently is one of them. So something along the line of what you're talking
Or
about.
the farmer's market. And we lose if people walk from all over the place, they absolutely have to park peripherally to get there.
Well, farmer's market is kind of a wild card because so much of it is outside of Moscow people.
Brandy, your question related to people taking their car to work to find space, or not? In other words,
No.
the campus has kind of solved the problem by having a big parking lot, and the students are certainly willing and able because as of 3 days ago, the parking lot is absolutely jam-packed. So I guess I wasn't sure, everybody who owns a home has a place to park their car at night, a nice little tidy place, but when they go to work, then the question all of a sudden arises. And if you drive in from Moscow Mountain, or even from the outside, just on the edge of the town, it's quite a different thing than if you are 6 or 8 blocks from downtown. I just presumed that, you know, it seems to me like the crisis is always about downtown, I think. Do you think it's something beside that?
Well, I mean, I think they're kind of two different things. What you're talking about would maybe be, would you be, when you're, during your working hours, you would need a satellite lot and a way to get to work.
Right.
Like, pretty
In other
regularly
words,
and
it
back
could
to
be
your
a
car.
parking place where there's a shuttle running back and forth, and you
Possibly,
park
right.
over here, and the shuttle gets you into downtown, so you don't have to find a 3-hour
Yeah, so then the
spot.
downtown spots are left open for customers,
For
for example.
customers, right.
But what I was talking about is an actual more like long-term storage of your vehicles, more for those high-density, say, the residents that live downtown and some of those apartments that really enjoy and do walk everywhere they need to go throughout most of the week. Maybe they work downtown and they do everything mostly on foot or on bike, or say, students living at Identity who have come here from out of the area with their vehicle, but they walk to campus and they can do most of their weekly commute on foot or by bike.
See.
But they still, so they may be those ones that are kind of leaving their car in a residential street for several days.
Yes, you have a lot of that.
Yeah,
Or
that's a
in
good
some,
point.
another private lot, where that private lot owner has to tow it eventually. So
And
I
not
think they're
all-
kind of two separate satellite issues that
Not
could be
all
explored.
homes have a garage or anything. A lot of places in my neighborhood, Almond and Asbury, are only the second and third streets off of Main Street. You know, it's practically downtown. You have 1 million students there. And you don't necessarily they don't all have garages, and all the houses don't have garages. All the houses that are rented, divided up as apartments, then you have multiple
It
people.
certainly would be, in a study, it would be really nice to imagine how many people have that situation. That, I mean, some of us, you have to put on a different hat. For those of us who have garages.
Well, I
you
think
know,
there's,
it's a different,
in Fort Russell, there are a lot of people park on the street. You park on the street, we park on the street, our neighbors park on the street, and the high school demonstrates every day the parking capacity of street parking in this town. I mean, they're everywhere. So I think I don't think it's just near campus. It's throughout the traditional neighborhoods. Before we required off-street parking, most houses were designed to park on the street. And I don't think that's so bad, personally. It's more pleasant for a pedestrian not to have curb cuts everywhere you walk, every 10 feet or 100 feet. But anyway,
If
So-
one of the purposes of this questionnaire is to sort of track things through time, it might be interesting to ask a question, do you own a car that you use more than twice a week? And see
What's
what
your
that
primary-
looks like in a few years.
yeah, what's your primary means of getting to work or getting to school?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we could ask
I
that.
think those questions, I think that, what you just said has been asked in the general Moscow citizen survey
Oh.
about how do you get to work, but not, do you use your car more than
okay.
2 times a week? I mean, that could be useful, because if you have a lot of people that are saying no, then there's potential for
Right.
some longer-term solutions. Again, I don't know if it's really the planning and zoning.
Or how many
commission,
car
but-
trips a day, or something like that, do you make?
Sounds
You
like
know.
transportation.
Well,
Yeah.
You brought up the alleys, though, because not all areas have a lot of don't all have alleys, whereas with the alleys, you have, in addition to having a place to put a car, if you use your garage for a car, it's also the trash pickup versus like A Street, go up and down A Street, and be the bus trying to avoid the garbage truck coming through, because that's where all the roll carts are, And I don't like looking at roll carts on a major street like that all the time, or on my street, as far as that goes. So alleys were there, and then they were gone, and it comes up in subdivision plats that come through. And I don't know if there's something in that.
Well, where do we want to go with these questions? What are our priorities? It sounds like there's, support for this question in terms of neighborhood characteristics. And then, what about, could we go back to looking at Victoria's affordability housing? Yeah.
Which I would scratch the first one, because I agree with you, that's really more housing or affordable housing.
And do, the second one, we already allow it. So what would we really find out?
Well, it'd be hard to affect that one, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it's really up to the
Right.
developers and contractors to develop that type of housing. We've provided the option to allow it in areas where we do allow it, and, I don't know that we'd be able to do anything with that result.
and I think that's, unless we get into something regulatory or something that we can be regulatory, we can't really control what the market does. I mean, I'm agreeing with you on a number of the questions that we might ask, that it's really up to the developers to see what we can't really tell them what to develop. I mean, yeah. So that one is tangential to what we're doing with the smaller lot clustered housing, in a sense. And so it's kind of asked in the other question. So, let's see, or we could, it's a nice question, but I think it's covered in Mike's list that he has, so. I'm curious to know what, and the trouble is that it's hard with the general survey, but I'm curious to know whether there's a market for, kind of retirees or faculty or staff at the university with sort of townhouses closer to campus. But I don't know if that's too specific for a general citizen survey, so.
Well, senior citizen doesn't have to be closer to campus, and that's another area. Senior citizen.
Well, I'm not talking about senior communities, I'm talking
No,
more
I'm talking about condominiums
Yeah,
and things like
right.
that they want to downsize and get into
Right.
other types of housing.
That also
Right.
seems like something that would be of more interest to a developer.
Right. No,
Then-
you're right. It's again, it's going in that arena, so it's not, yeah.
Could we go back to the climate ones that Wendy had up?
I was just trying to figure out stuff that might fit into our subdivision ordinances, for example, the requirements that go with that, but.
That first one, that really kind of which of the following strategies should the Planning and Zoning Commission prioritize? I think that kind of gets to the heart of what people think we should do related specifically to mitigation of climate change. So,
Yeah, and that second thing, for some reason, when climate change didn't have universal acceptability, and I went to a big planning conference, and it was a big discussion. How do you get people to start, realizing we need to plan for it? And one of the things that was brought up constantly was people get urban heat island effect. They go and they park in a hot parking lot, or they park in a downtown area with a lot of pavement and no shade, and they get it. They get that it's hot, and that maybe it's a good idea to not be so hot. And so that was sort of a segue into starting to accept that we need to start planning for mitigation of that heat that's generated from so much pavement. And it's probably not even necessary to explain what it is. I just threw it in there as a, but that's really what I was getting at, was how to, because we can require, we can have more stringent landscape and tree
Right.
requirements. And I think we need them in some of the newer subdivisions where their sidewalks are just totally out in the sun, and it depends on whether the homeowner decides to plant a tree near the sidewalk or not. And in a lot of cases, they don't, because they don't want it to obstruct their view. So I don't know. I mean, it was just
I kind of like, I guess I'm trying to go back to the idea, the first one we were talking about where we've now eliminated the proximity to, but the neighborhood characteristics. And then I like where we're heading, or what you've suggested here, where we're really saying what strategies should we, as a commission, be prioritizing to mitigate these effects. And then maybe we can add some sub-questions like we're doing to the first one. But if we could break down our two questions to those two things, I think we'd be where we would want to. I certainly would support heading that direction.
and it could even be combining all three of those
Sure.
in terms of tree plantings in these circumstances, and then have a few other mitigation strategies. And there's kind of the two approaches. One is climate change is here, so how do we mitigate its effects, which this is, and then the other side, which is how do we reduce our carbon footprint, which is the other side of it that I was trying to get to with the other questions. So, but it's, I don't know. So what do we, how do we move forward here? So that we, because I think we probably want to review a final draft of questions at the next meeting, right, before it goes actually in the
How
survey.
many questions do we get?
Two.
Two?
So we can have two with, multiple drops on those two. And so we have, I think, the first one that Mike's got, we've all kind of agreed on that one, and I'm not sure what to do on the second one. So what did I say on the other? I'm trying to remember what I said on the, and this was more reducing carbon footprint, and maybe it's more transportation, but, if you, right now, hybrid vehicles really save a lot of carbon, and but it's not easy for people to use them because there's no place to charge them. And so if we started working that into, downtown, some of the, somewhere in downtown area, somewhere in, I don't know, that was, and then the remote parking lot thing is what we were talking about.
Well, how about if you use the question in the first one, what priorities should planning and zoning set, and then come back to, there's three drop downs right there, or maybe include one of the tree ones, but when you just say which of the following strategies, it doesn't tie it to planning and zoning. That's why I like the question that you had in that prior slide, but then maybe
Gotcha.
expand it beyond just the tree thing. Maybe there could be a tree one too, but pick or choose one or three of
Well, it
these
could be
questions.
worded where I also include, or we also include carbon footprint with the mitigation strategies in
Sure, you
one
could.
question,
Yeah,
and not try to educate on the difference.
yeah.
And then combine, include some of those. Which ones do you think you would want to include? I mean, I could work on a redraft of what you're talking about and send it around to everybody. I'm not sure I could
Well,
recompose it on the site.
I guess one of the things that I'm thinking is that if we could agree where conceptually we're heading on our two questions, one of them being that first one and the second one being some form of this, then now we've got this down to a manageable decision point.
I think if we just get the topics, then we could take a stab at it and send it out and have it ready for next time, and we could take a look at it and discuss it more.
Yeah,
So morphing, in my case, morphing the two that I put here into a few strategies that combine all of it somehow, summarize all of it or whatever. Yes, Mike?
Well, I like that idea. Could you go back to the page before? Because the statement in there, which strategy should the Planning and Zoning Commission prioritize? Those two questions can be tied together so well and keep the planning and zoning focus in it.
Right.
So people know that it does come from us. And then, like you say, pick two of these and two of the next page. I think it's a wonderful idea. I absolutely think that combines an awful lot of good information we can get. Now, you said this goes out to 1,200 households, is that correct, Mike?
Yeah. We don't get results from 1,200, but
I
it goes out,
understand.
yeah.
Yeah, it would almost be like the same type of format that first question is, where you have multiple,
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
and then
yeah.
you
And
manage
you
to
just
get a
keep
lot of two
the
questions.
umbrella question at the top and, yeah.
yeah.
And so I'd say to mitigate the effect and reduce the carbon footprint.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just add it in there, so morph it together. Is everybody okay with that? Should this give us some direction and we'll
Yeah.
work on it? Okay. All right. Thank you for your input on that. Okay, item number 6, is that where we are? Yeah. Review of proposed changes in the mobile home and RV park ordinance, and Mike's going to present on that.
Same thing, isn't it?
I think it's just one's got the red to
it's
show.
different.
Oh, one's before and one's
One
after.
shows the
Yeah,
changes.
okay, I get it.
One's got the strikeout.
Oh, I have to read.
It's easy to find where we are.
Okay.
So we were previously, this is our attempt at modifying the 2 mobile home park chapters and then the RV park chapter. And so the one is legislative format showing the changes, and then the other one's probably a little easier to follow because it's clean. It's the clean format. But essentially, this is what we've been working on previously. I think we dropped it for a couple months, but picked it back up. There were, as you recall, there were 2 really mobile home park chapters. These hadn't been updated since the 70s. And then we had our RV park chapter, and so this originated with Gary Lester's request to allow recreational vehicles to lift the 6-month limitation on stays of RVs within RV parks, and then allow RVs within some mobile home parks as well. And so we were making those changes as the commission directed from Gary's request. But after we were looking at the, all three chapters, since they were originated in the 70s, they were really outdated. And to do it justice, we really needed to go through and just, update all the different sections within each chapter. And so what we have here is really just the merging of Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. And the first one just addressed new mobile home parks and expansions of mobile home parks. And then Chapter 3 was construction and maintenance of mobile home parks, so that covered all of our existing parks. And so it was confusing because we had one chapter that covered the new and expansions, and then we had another chapter that covered all the existing ones. I mean, I don't think we've had a new mobile home park or manufactured home park in town since the 80s either. So we haven't really used the new chapter at all. It's mainly just coming from the existing chapter. And really the only difference between the two is that you're giving leeway on a lot of the setback requirements for existing parks. So a lot of the current parks are the size, the lots are a lot smaller. The manufactured homes are probably a little smaller as well. And the setbacks are different because they were developed at a time probably when we may or may not have had RV park or mobile home park regulations. And so what we've done, we can kind of go through page by page. So that's the primary goal, is to combine those two chapters. So that's what we've done with the manufactured home park. And we needed to go through and change the terminology. I think we talked about before the different definitions. And a lot of these originate from state code, so we're just adopting the state code definition. So we have manufactured home, so that was updated, mobile home, that was updated as well. So at the time these were developed, everything that was being brought into mobile home parks was a mobile home. There's a year where that changes, and so HUD started inspecting mobile homes and certifying them June 15th, 1976. So that's really the only difference between a mobile home and a manufactured home, is whether or not it was constructed prior to that date or after that date.
So I have a question for you, because I've been asked by several people what the difference between a mobile home and a recreational vehicle is. Where's the line drawn?
A recreational vehicle. Well, I mean, it would just, you would either meet the definition and it'd be stamped and inspected by HUD, or you would just go off of the definition of a recreational vehicle.
And that's in here somewhere?
It is.
Okay, because I couldn't answer the question, that's why.
Really the difference is just
One moves on the highway.
who inspects.
Well, the mobile home is supposed to be able to, not that it does very often.
Who inspects it, and really what's its, intention is for. And so still RVs are intended to be just temporary camping, living corridors for certain times per year,
But they're still required to be self-contained in our ordinance, right? So in a sense, and we're allowing them to be permanent. That's why I'm asking the
Well, they're
question.
starting to be merged, right? So they have park model RVs, which are still declared RVs, but if you look at them, they look similar to the tiny homes that are
Okay,
being developed.
okay.
They look similar if you've driven up any of the lakefront properties or the St. Joe drainage, you'll see tons of them. They look like small sheds, but they're more elaborate with front
Right.
porches. A lot of those are park model RVs, which are still
Okay.
declared RVs, and they've just,
Okay.
they've kind of grown together in a certain sense because,
So the lines are blurred.
There's still definitions that we go off of, but the lines are starting to become a little more gray. But the definition of a recreational vehicle now is a vehicle type unit previously designed as temporary living quarters for recreational, camping, or travel use, which either has its own motor power or is mounted on or drawn by another vehicle. And then it gives examples of camping trailer, motorhome, travel trailer, fifth wheel, truck camper. And so those used to be just the basic entities, but now, ever since these park models have been developed, now that park model is added to that list of recreational vehicles.
Thank you, yeah.
So they're not inspected by HUD, Housing Urban Development. They're not intended for year-round habitation. They're intended for temporary recreational use. Even though that's the direction we're going, is to, begin to attempt to allow them for
Permanent
probably
housing.
not,
Yeah.
completely permanent, but semi-permanent, where maybe it's a couple years at a time. So that was the update, as far as the definitions, just adopting state code, their definitions. And then we had talked about modular home and allowing those within manufactured home parks, and those would cover a lot of the tiny homes that are constructed off-site, but they're not on wheels or chassis. So that's what Idaho Division of Building Safety, that's their version of more of a manufactured home. So it's not a manufactured home, it's not a mobile home, it's not an RV, it's a prefabricated structure intended for living that Idaho Division of Building Safety inspects, and they end up giving it an insignia that says it's inspected, similar to manufactured homes that get the HUD insignia.
Okay, so one is HUD and one is,
Yeah, one's HUD and one's Idaho Division of Building Safety. That's the difference.
okay.
Do you think that, just a question about those so-called recreational units, I wonder what the number is of people in America who have decided to just live in their recreational vehicle. They've sold their home, they're on the road. They're on the road people in a way. It just seems like that had to change our concept of what I believe. Now, could I be wrong? I believe there are thousands and thousands of people who are simply, they're in Yuma for 4 months, they move on up to Montana for 3 months.
Yeah, you have a lot of retirees, but I
Yeah.
think also what's driving that with a lot of young people is that you can work remotely as long as you have some type of internet or cellular connection. If you have a job that all you need is a computer to work from, why couldn't you travel around and not have a permanent home and stay at, different places at a time? And so I think that's driving that. Looking at like the park model, some of these really fancy park model RVs, I mean, you're talking 80 to 100,000. At one point in time, I mean, you spent that on your home. And so I think you're just, starting to see that shift a little
Right,
bit
right,
as to,
right. And so it seems to me like we have to be sensitive to that as we try and describe what they are. Because if people can live for 10 years in one of these units, it's clearly a home. Yeah. And, so I think that's where we're going. I was just trying to
yeah.
Be a little sensitive to that word, though. I don't know if we're not that attractive a place to probably see it here, but I'm guessing if you lived in Arizona or in some other attractive places where people love to go and spend 5 or 6 months, we'd see big rows of.
What I'm hearing from friends who live here who spend the winter in those places, it's not easy to book spaces anymore, and they're really expensive. So Moscow might become a destination for RVs.
Well, we are
because,
the
you can
Tuscany of the U.S., right? I mean,
Right, yeah.
And it has already started.
Yeah.
I mean, you take a look at a couple of these RV parks, there's an awful lot of people that come up here when the weather gets inclement down south.
Right,
Gets
too hot.
hot.
Yeah.
They come up here. I got several friends that try and live 3 or 4 or 5 months of the year up here in their RV.
Yep. So we may get more demand.
Yeah, I mean, could very well happen.
Sure. And then we changed, so the manufactured home park, we had a definition that was our own definition, and we just updated that to include manufactured homes, mobile homes, and modular homes within that definition. And, throughout the whole document, since we were updating it from mobile home to manufactured home, we just changed that terminology, and so it's just updating mobile to manufactured now. Then we get to, I think, starting on page 4, we go through kind of what it takes to develop a manufactured home park, and we have preliminary and final plans that are required to be submitted. We had just updated those, so I think it was previously 5 complete sets. I mean, this is, usually you'd require 5 hard copy sets of plans so you could distribute those to all the different departments. Well, everything's pretty much gone digital these days, and so we have electronic review, and so we're just updating that to come up with the current times. And then we eliminated the detailed internal review process. So if you look on page 5, there's this really detailed review about how the Director of Community Development has to submit the plans to the city engineer, fire chief, and building official 15 days prior to the meeting, and staff will complete it within 10 days. These are really just internal review periods that we don't necessarily need to codify in the ordinance. So we had just taken those out. And then there's some awkward language. It all really comes down to, the way it reads is that Planning and Zoning Commission, approves or disapproves the plans, or they could do it with conditions or request modifications within 60 days after the first meeting. And then they have a kind of an awkward follow-up sentence that says, plans recommended for approval will be forwarded to council for their review, even though it just said that the commission will approve or deny or approve with conditions. And so with our RV park code or PUD codes, if it's just one single lot, which all these developments will be, it usually just goes to Planning and Zoning Commission and doesn't go to City Council. And so we would just strike the council review and just keep the final decision at Planning and Zoning Commission, similar to RV parks. And then the final plans, similar, just updating to current requirements with electronic submittal, and then eliminating the council review and all the internal discussion about how it needs to be routed. And then we go through standards, and so we talked about before about how there were standards for new or expanded manufactured home parks, and then there were standards for existing manufactured home parks. And so what we've done is just incorporated the standards. So, first of all, I think what we're calling, the first set of standards are really just the bulk and dimensional standards. What's the minimum lot size? What's the lot size of the manufactured home? What are the setback requirements? What's the space between the units? What's the maximum lot coverage, types of things like that. So we call those bulk and dimensional standards. And then we've got the 2 subcategories, new or expanded manufactured home parks and existing manufactured home parks. So really not changing any of the standards for for either one of them. We just carried over what we had previously in Chapter 3 for existing parks. But you're given more leeway. So if you look through existing manufactured home parks, obviously they were developed at a time where we possibly didn't have any standards, and so there's really no, common total site size that each of them meets. They vary depending upon where they're at, and so it really doesn't matter to specify a minimum lot size or a site size, because if you're doing a new manufactured home, you would just have to go off of the new standards. The site size really range from park to park. The setbacks, a lot of the older parks, the units, the manufactured homes will go right up to the internal street, whereas the new park standards would require a 10-foot setback there. So there's none in existing. And then we go through, really the main thing we look for when they're siting new manufactured homes is that they have to be at least 10 feet away from any other manufactured home or accessory structure. And really, that's the only standard that we review it for
That's for
these
fire.
days. And it's for, fire safety is really the issue there. And so that's what we've carried over and separated the 2 out, and that's really how we've combined the 2 sections. But and then all the rest of the sections that were previously listed as like Section 210, Section 211, I mean, these are all really standards that shouldn't be in separate sections, and so we just put these under the umbrella of the standards for the different parks. So these categories were recreational area, buffer area, streets and roads, private streets, walkways, lighting, parking, utilities, refuse handling, space numbering, skirting. So those are all standards, and so we just put those underneath the standards category. Really didn't change very many of them. I think parking was one. We ended up moving the phasing on page 7. We moved that to the very end of this chapter because phasing was more appropriate when you talk about just phasing and zoning administrators' decisions and things like that. They're usually at the very end of the chapter. Parking is on page 8. So there were 3 subsections. It just determines how many parking spaces are required. Previously, they defined a parking space as a 300 square foot area, which is really large. The standard for just a standard parking spot is 9 by 20. And so we just struck the 300 and it has to be at least 9 by 20. And then there was sections about just additional guest or visitor parking and what the rate was there. And it was actually pretty high. It was 1 additional space beyond the 2 required spaces for every mobile home park, or every mobile home unit. And I think that, we probably try to, usually these are off-street, so they're not parking on the street. There's another parking area where guests or visitors are able to come and park. And we just spitballed this one to a certain extent. 1 parking space for every 3 manufactured homes for guest and visitor parking. But there is typically parking on the street that goes around the manufactured home park to park. But there was, seemed like a fair number from what they currently had. And then there was an accessory parking storage area for RVs, boats, or similar equipment, which I've never seen at any of these parks. It seems like an odd thing to do is, require a 6-foot tall fence to enclose an area intended for storage of RVs, boats, or similar equipment for the, pretty much the occupants of the park. So we eliminated that requirement. Then the refuse handling, apparently we treat manufactured home parks completely different than every other development in town, because I've never seen the detail that's in, kind of this section. So previously, there's all these requirements for kind of the collection, disposal, and of refuse in mobile home parks. It goes on to specify that it can't create any health hazards, rodent harborage, insect breeding, accident fires or air pollution. Has to be fly tight, watertight, rodent proof. So all of our refuse is handled through the sanitation department and LSI, and we have roll carts now that serve all the manufactured homes. So we would just eliminate all the current kind of antiquated language and just say that all refuse collection shall be approved by the city sanitation department. And then the next page, we go through kind of the responsibilities of the park management, which all seem fine still, but there is subsection D, which states that an office shall be maintained on all mobile home park premises, which allows residents to contact the management at least on a 40-hour per week basis. So I think, things have shifted over the years. Usually maybe it's one tenant in a manufactured home park that serves as the park manager that they just contact. You don't necessarily have park offices anymore. It's usually a residence on site, or it could be a property management company that you call. And so we just eliminated that requirement. That's fairly antiquated as well. And then just moving phase development, and that's at the very end of the code. And there was all these specifications about when you can phase and when you can't. And we just kept it simple that phasing shall be permitted subject to approval of Planning and Zoning Commission. So they would just propose that as part of a manufactured home park proposal, and the commission could review that and approve it during the public hearings. And then modular homes, just to be clear that we are allowing modular homes within manufactured home parks now. We have this statement at the end in this section that modular homes which have been inspected and approved by Idaho Division of Building Safety and which contain the appropriate modular insignia shall be permitted within manufactured home parks. So that's pretty much the end of the manufactured home park section. The next couple pages are everything that was in the existing. So there's 2.5 pages that was in the existing section, and like I mentioned before, a lot of that was just the bulk and dimensional standards and the 10-foot separation. Everything else, walks, street system, water supply, sewage disposal, electrical, all that's really contained and duplicated in the new section. So we didn't need that anymore. We could just eliminate it. And then starting on page 14, this brings us to the RV park code. And really, we're just making the modification, eliminating the stay limit. And we also add, like we talked about before, the park model recreational vehicle. So on page 15, just adding the definition of a park model. Updating the preliminary plans for current electronic submittal and the final plans as well. And then the last, or second to the last page, so 19, that's where we discussed the length of stay. So previously it was that you couldn't occupy an RV space for a period exceeding 180 days in a 12-month period. And so we'd strike that section and say that persons occupying vehicles with total hookups, including water, sewer, electricity, shall be permitted to occupy an RV space year-round. However, all recreational vehicles must be owner-occupied, and the operator of the RV park shall not obtain recreational vehicles for the purpose of renting them out. So that was the comment last time. I think we heard, I think Scott had brought that up about owner occupancy and being concerned about somebody purchasing a number of these. We still have to make sure that that is all right with our city attorney. We've put it in the ordinance. But we'll just verify that. But that was from the result of I think the last meeting where that was expressed as a concern. And then we'd still keep the section about tents and vehicles, less than total hookup. So if you're occupying a tent or a vehicle that doesn't have total hookup capacity, you're limited to 14 days every 12-month period. And so we would there's no change there. We would just leave that in there. That's pretty much it.
Any comments?
Questions?
Nice job.
Yeah, it looks very thorough.
Very good.
So, where would you like us to go from here?
Well, we're going to check on a couple more things in here just with our city attorney, and then, I think we're fairly close to scheduling a public hearing and moving forward, so.
Okay, when do you anticipate
Probably
that?
maybe just a final review I think we'll be able to do that, final review next time, and then maybe schedule it after that.
Okay, all right. And you'll
I just
probably
have
get your, sorry.
I just have, I'm still back on people who live in your literature, you use the word temporary in almost every case. And where is the paragraph that fits the person who is now living in this home with a motor and a steering wheel? Where is the comment about that? I guess.
Yeah, it would still be classified as an RV. It would just be allowed, people would be allowed to live there year-round because we'd eliminate the 6-month limitation. And so that's really the crux of people living in an RV year-round would be if we eliminate the 6-month limitation on stay.
So it just seems like there should be some paragraph where the word temporary is thrown out. If you go, I don't know if maybe I'm just losing it, along the way, but in the recreational vehicle deal, every thing says it's temporary. Is designed to provide temporary accommodation, temporary accommodation, temporary accommodation. And so I'm asking how legitimate the people who have decided not to do that temporarily, but are doing it permanently. And we don't seem to admit that those people exist. That's my question.
Well, yeah, a lot of this stems from state
We all
and
just
national
winking
code.
here, we're just winking. Oh, hi, how long have you been out on the road? Right now, we don't see them as much, but a few years ago, we used to be susceptible. We supported the RV, the people, and they would come to the Kibbe Dome and park, 20 or 30 units would come rolling in and have some courses and go to some plays and stuff like that. And those are people, when you talk to them, that are just living in that unit, period. That's what they're doing. So, and we don't see them as much right now as we used to. It seemed to me, it's been a decade almost since we decided not to be supportive, that we, being the university, decided not to be gracious to those people. And apparently they go to Lewiston or something now, but I'm just a little curious.
They may have the home as their permanent residence, but where they land up is a temporary time frame.
That's a good point.
And
Because they don't seem to, they are on the road.
They're on the road.
So they have temporary homes, maybe 6 or 7 places a year. Good point.
They're not, they're not in our jurisdiction. They're,
well, and we have addressed it by
State
taking the
highway.
6-month provision out.
Right.
We have,
I mean, we've addressed that.
Yeah.
Temporary, is it gonna be 21 days or 21 months? And by taking the 6-month stipulation out, I think we probably have, as a commission, addressed that.
I can live with it.
I guess it's all relative, because
Yeah.
what's the average length that someone owns a home in the US?
It's all temporary.
It's all, we're temporarily here on the earth anyway.
You and I are.
It's okay, Mike. I'm just fussing with that little concept, but I get it. Victoria, that's good.
No, I think you're raising a good point, Nels. I think we are transitioning to it becoming a permanent form of housing culturally and nationwide, really. I mean, not just here.
And if you look at that paragraph, I think you could eliminate temporary because it's almost a redundant. 'Cause
It
you
is,
could just say
yeah.
designed as living quarters for recreational camping or travel use. Those are almost by definition temporary sorts of things. I don't care either way, but I think you could take temporary out of these and it wouldn't change the meaning.
Well,
But
I just needed to talk about it.
I'm
for a
going either
minute,
way,
so
yeah.
That's good.
But, to where, I guess, I have a question here. Oh no, recreational vehicle is separate from one of those tent structures that's on a trailer. That gets a little bit poorly insulated on other things.
Well, I think that's the primary difference, is that, it's not inspected to a building code
Right,
standard
right.
and certified to that standard of a certain period of life. And that it's more of just a temporary, camping, vehicle to be able to do that. But we're seeing this shift where they're starting to, it's more gray area and they're starting to be combined. And so just trying to recognize that, really.
And it's tough, because in the literal description that we use in our industry is if you take it someplace and take the wheels and tires and tongue off of it, it becomes a manufactured home or a modular home,
Right,
or, whatever terminology you want to use. If you pull it in there and you leave the wheels and tires and tongue on it and you move it 6 months later, it's a recreational vehicle.
Right.
Tomato, but, and there are people that cross over both sides of that.
And at some point, they become so permanent, they lose their capacity to be mobile anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And most of your manufactured homes will not tolerate moving many times.
Right. They might have to go half down the highway and the other half.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway, so so I guess we'll look forward to hearing what you come back with in terms of the city attorney's comments, et cetera. So, any other comments? Okay, we're all ready to go RVing. All right. All right, so Joel, the Transportation Commission meeting report, is there
The
anything?
Transportation Commission met on the 8th of August. The main item of interest discussed was that the commission has not given up on, and the city has not given up on the possibility of extending the bike lane on 3rd Street as far as, Washington Street. And there's discussion of possible design changes and so on relative to that issue. The next meeting of the Transportation Commission will be on the first Thursday of
September?
September.
Okay.
I have not seen an agenda.
Okay. And then, thank you, Joel. And then we have announcements, and I know among other things, did you want to talk about the subdivision committee? Well,
Yeah, I just, want to make an announcement. We've got an exciting opportunity for somebody to be part of the subdivision review committee. That was the last bit of information. So after we had done the final review of the subdivision code and our traditional and cluster options, we typically go out and form a subcommittee of stakeholders in that group. And so this group would be a subdivision developer, land use attorney, and a private engineer. And then we usually have a couple commission members as part of that group. And so I've tapped Wendy as the chair, but we're just looking if anybody else has any interest in serving on this committee. So we'll probably have a couple meetings. I intend on sending everything out in advance for everybody to review. And I'm sure you're all, fresh up on what, the current subdivision code says. So you won't have a whole lot of work up to the point of the meetings, and we'll just have probably 2 or 3 meetings to come to a recommendation. But the meetings are usually at noon, and the city provides lunch, and so if anybody's interested to join us, we'll probably start kicking off the meetings in about 2 to 3 weeks. And like I said, it'd only be maybe a couple meetings to get it done, but just take a couple hours of your time in the next coming months. So, anybody interested?
I'll jump in.
Thank you, Rob. Okay.
Way to go.
Yeah.
Couldn't
All right.
stand the silence.
So are there any other announcements? Anybody? All right. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Super, thank you.